Riding into Harlan Flats with nothing but a carpetbag and a letter of introduction, Abigail Morse told herself she had made worse decisions than this one. She was not entirely sure that was true. The letter had come from a notice posted in the Boise employment office, handwritten in a slanted script that suggested a man not accustomed to asking for help. Wanted, a capable woman to keep house and cook for one man and his child. Room provided off the kitchen. Wages modest but steady. Inquire for Jack Calloway at the Harlan Flats Mercantile. She had read it 3 times, standing in the cold lobby with her coat buttoned to her chin, and then she had written back before she could think better of it. That had been 6 weeks ago. Now October was pressing down on the Idaho territory like a hand flattening bread dough, and the stage had let her off on a street that was mostly mud and ambition. 2 horses were tied at the rail outside a building that called itself the Silver Creek Dry Goods. A man leaned against the post beside them, arms folded, hat pulled low enough that she could not read his face. He was watching her with the careful patience of someone who had learned not to expect much from arrivals. She squared her shoulders and walked toward him. The carpetbag pulled at her arm. She had packed it herself the morning her landlady in Boise had told her, not unkindly, that the room would need to go to a paying tenant by end of month. So she was here. She was committed. "Mr. Calloway," she said. It was not a question. He pushed off the post. He was taller than she had imagined, broader through the shoulder, with a jaw that had not seen a razor in several days. He looked at her the way a man looks at weather he has not decided yet whether to trust. "Miss Morse," he said, "you made it. I said I would." A pause settled between them, thin as the October air. Then he reached out and took the carpetbag from her hand without asking, turned toward the wagon at the side of the road and said, "It's 8 miles. We'd best go." She followed. She was not sure what else there was to do. Rain began before they cleared the last building on the main street, and neither of them said a word about it. The wagon seat was narrow. She sat with her hands in her lap and watched the pines close in on either side of the road, and tried to believe she was equal to whatever came next. Harlan Flats disappeared behind them. 8 miles, 1 child, a room off the kitchen. She had made worse decisions. She was fairly sure of it now. The farm appeared through the rain like something remembered rather than seen. A low house, a barn showing fresh timber along one wall, a kitchen garden that had been put to bed for the season with a neatness that surprised her. Someone cared about this place. She had not expected that. Jack drew the wagon to a stop near the porch. Before he could climb down, the front door opened and a small figure appeared in the frame, barefoot despite the cold, wearing a flour sack dress with a blue ribbon at the collar that someone had tied with more love than skill. The child was perhaps 5 years old. She had her father's dark eyes and a quantity of brown hair that had been braided, then partly escaped the braid, so that it stood out around her face like a weather vane caught in a crosswind. She stared at Abigail with the total, unguarded attention that only very young children and certain old dogs can manage. "Papa," the child said, "is that her?" "That's her," Jack said. He had already lifted the carpetbag down. "Come in, out of the rain, Ellie." Ellie did not move. She kept her eyes on Abigail. "You're going to cook for us?" "I am," Abigail said. "Papa burns the porridge." "Eleanor," Jack's voice carried a warning, but it was a thin one. Abigail almost smiled. She did not let herself. "I'll do my best not to," she said. Ellie considered this for a moment with the gravity of a circuit judge, then stepped aside to let them in. The inside of the house was clean, which surprised her again. The floor had been swept recently. There was a fire going in the stove, which told her Jack had laid it before going to collect her, which told her something about the kind of man he was beneath the silence. The kitchen table had 3 chairs, 2 adult-sized, 1 small one with a notched leg that had been repaired with a strip of rawhide. On the wall beside the back door was a shelf holding a Bible, a tin cup, and a child's wooden horse missing one ear. Jack set her bag beside the door that opened off the kitchen. Her room, she understood, the one the notice had mentioned. He stood back. He was working up to something, she could tell, the way a man does when he has rehearsed a speech and now is uncertain whether it was the right speech. "The agreement," he said finally. "It stands as written. You keep the house and cook the meals. In return, the room, meals of your own, and $3 a month." "That's what I understood," she said. "Ellie is my business," he said. It came out harder than he likely intended. "I'll see to her needs. I don't need you to mother her." Abigail looked at the child, who was now sitting at the kitchen table, drawing a careful circle on the tabletop with one finger, pretending very hard not to be listening. "Understood," Abigail said. Something in his face shifted, just slightly, as if he had expected argument. When she gave him none, he did not seem to know what to do with the extra space. He picked up his hat, which he had set on the table, and held it. "I'll show you where things are," he said. "Then I've got fence to see to before dark." "All right." He showed her the pantry, better stocked than she'd expected, though the flour was low. He showed her the root cellar behind the house and the wood pile under the lean-to. He pointed out the well and the path to the barn, and the place where the third porch step was soft and ought not be trusted. He did all of this without once looking at her directly, which told her that looking directly at people was not something he did lightly. When he left for the fence, the quiet he left behind was total, except for the fire and the rain and Ellie, who had moved to the window to watch him go. "He goes every day," Ellie said, to no one in particular. "He goes, and then he comes back." Abigail had her coat off and her sleeves rolled before the wagon had cleared the yard. The pantry had dried beans, salt pork, 2 onions, and enough cornmeal for a decent supper. She got the beans soaking and started on cornbread and tried not to think too hard about what she had walked into. The contract had given her the room off the kitchen. The room off the kitchen was what she had. It was enough. It would be enough. Ellie climbed onto the chair with the rawhide mended leg and watched her work. She did not say anything for a full 5 minutes, which Abigail suspected was something of a record for her. Then she said, "What's your name? Papa just said she's coming." "Abigail." Ellie tried the name in her mouth. "Abigail," she said. "That's long." "It is. Can I call you Abby?" Abigail cut the 2 onions in half and set them in the pot. She had not been called Abby since she was small herself. Her mother had called her that. She thought about saying no. She thought about saying Miss Morse, which was proper. "You can call me Abby," she said. Ellie nodded, satisfied, as if this settled something important. She propped her chin on her hand and watched the steam begin to rise from the pot. Outside, the rain came down steady. The fire popped once and settled. The room smelled of onion and wood smoke and wet wool from Abigail's coat, drying on its peg. "My mama died," Ellie said. She said it the way children say such things, plainly, because it is simply true. Abigail stirred the pot. "I know," she said. "I'm sorry. Papa doesn't talk about her." "No," Abigail said. "I imagine not." She did not push. The child had offered it freely, and Abigail let it sit there in the warm kitchen air between them, like something precious that ought not be handled too often. Jack came in at dusk with mud to his knees and said nothing about the smell of the kitchen, which was by then rich with bean soup and fresh cornbread. He washed at the basin without being asked, dried his hands on the roller towel and sat down. Ellie climbed into her small chair and folded her hands in front of her, looking at him. "Grace, Papa," she said. He bowed his head. He said a few words, quiet and brief, and when he was done he looked up and found Abigail standing by the stove with the ladle in her hand, and for just a moment he looked the way a man looks when he has not been cared for in a very long time, and the fact of it catches him somewhere unguarded. "Sit down, Miss Morse," he said. "You eat too." She sat. She ate. Ellie talked enough for all three of them, about a spider she had found on the porch, about the way the creek sounded different in rain, about whether bears could smell cornbread from very far away. Jack answered each question with the patience of a man who had decided that this particular voice was the one thing he could still do right by in the world. Abigail ate her supper and watched them both, and told herself that she was here to cook and clean. That was all. The contract was clear on that. She told herself that for 13 more days before it started to feel like a lie. Ellie woke in the night. Abigail had been lying in the narrow bed in the room off the kitchen, listening to the wind change register as November moved in from the north, when she heard the sound, not crying, but a low, private kind of unhappiness that a child makes when she has decided she is too old to cry, but is not yet sure what to do instead. Abigail pulled her shawl around her and went into the kitchen. Ellie was at the table in her nightgown, sitting in her small chair with the one-eared wooden horse held against her chest. She looked up when Abigail came in, and her expression was the expression of someone caught in an embarrassing truth. "I had a dream," Ellie said. "All right," Abigail said. She built up the fire, because the kitchen had gone cold and a child's feet needed warmth. Then she put a small pot of milk on and found the sugar tin. She sat across from Ellie and did not ask about the dream. Ellie watched her. "You're not going to ask me what it was about?" "No," Abigail said. Ellie turned this over. "Why not? Some things are better left to settle on their own." The child looked down at the wooden horse. She ran her thumb over the place where the ear should have been. "It was about Mama," she said. Abigail said. She had on her blue dress. She was in the kitchen, but it wasn't this kitchen, and when I went to her, she turned around and it was someone else. Ellie's voice was steady. Only her hands changed, pressing a little harder on the horse. "That happens a lot." Abigail poured the warmed milk into a tin cup and set it in front of Ellie. She dropped a pinch of sugar in and stirred it with the handle of a spoon. She did not say "it will get better," or "she is watching over you," or any of the things that were said to comfort and landed nowhere near it. "Drink that," she said, "while it's warm." Ellie drank. Some color came back into her face. She held the cup in both hands and watched Abigail over the rim. "Papa doesn't know what to do with me when I have that dream," she said. "He holds me, but he doesn't know what to say, so he doesn't say anything, and then I feel bad that I made him sad." Abigail looked at the fire. "Your papa loves you very much," she said. "That's why it's hard." Ellie considered this. Then she said, with the decisive confidence of a 5-year-old who has resolved something, "You should sleep upstairs." Abigail looked at her. "I have a room." "I know, but it's far, and I have bad dreams sometimes, and Papa's room is right there, but he gets sad." Ellie set down her cup. "There's the little room across the hall. It's where Mama's sewing things are. You could sleep there and it wouldn't bother anyone." Abigail was quiet for a moment. "That's not my place to decide, Ellie." "I'll decide it," Ellie said, with a certainty that would have been funny if it weren't also slightly terrifying. Abigail made no promises. She got the child back to bed, tucking the quilt in at the sides the way she had seen her own mother do it, and went back to her own cold room and lay awake for a while listening to the wind. She did not move upstairs. She was still in the room off the kitchen when 3 more weeks passed, and November turned serious, and the first real snow came. She had settled into the days the way water settles into a shape, adapting, filling the available space without overflowing. She cooked. She cleaned. She mended shirts because they needed mending and there was no one else to do it. She found that the pantry had a weak shelf and reinforced it herself with a bit of salvaged lumber, which Jack discovered on a Tuesday and stood looking at for a long moment before he said anything. "You did that?" he asked. "The beans were going to go through the floor," she said. He ran his hand along the join. It was a neat piece of work. She had learned from her father, who had believed that a woman who couldn't fix a shelf was a woman at the mercy of circumstances. "It's good work," Jack said. She said nothing, but something small and warm moved through her that she chose not to examine too closely. Then came the day the letter arrived. Holt Greer had been buying up land along the Silver Creek drainage for the better part of 2 years, and he had not done it gently. 3 families had sold, 2 because they needed to, 1 because they feared not to. Jack's 40 acres sat square in the middle of what Greer wanted, and everyone in Harlan Flats knew it. Jack had said nothing about any of this to Abigail, but Ellie, who absorbed information the way good wool absorbs water, had told her, in pieces, over the course of several breakfasts. The letter came on a Thursday. Abigail brought it in from the mailbox with the flour and the salt and set it on the table. Jack came in at midday, saw it, and stood with it in his hand without opening it. She had seen that stillness in him before, the particular stillness of a man who knows that whatever is in his hand is going to cost him something. "I'll step out," she said. "Stay," he said. It was quiet, but it stopped her at the door. He opened it. He read it. He set it down on the table and put both hands flat on either side of it, head bowed, the way a man looks when he is deciding whether to give in to something. She stayed by the door and let him be. "Greer's putting in a water claim on the creek," he said at last. "If it holds, it cuts off the east field. No water for that field. The east field is worth nothing. No east field. I can't make the note on the land." He lifted his head. He looked directly at her, the first time he had done it without catching himself. "I lose the farm." Abigail came back to the table. She looked at the letter, which was written in the smooth, confident hand of a lawyer who had never worried about water rights in his life. She thought about the kitchen she had scrubbed, the shelf she had fixed, the cornbread she had made 42 mornings in a row. She thought about Ellie. "When is the hearing?" she asked. 3 weeks, the county clerk over in Millhaven. "And what's your evidence?" He looked at her differently then. "My deed," he said, "shows prior claim to the water." "Who holds the deed?" "Land office in Millhaven." "Then we go get a copy," she said, "and we find you someone who can read the law, and we show up to that hearing." He was quiet. He looked like a man who had been carrying something heavy alone for long enough that the offer of help felt suspicious. "This isn't your fight," he said. Abigail looked at him steadily. "I mended your shirts," she said. "I fixed your shelf. I warmed your daughter's milk at 2 in the morning. If this place fails, where does Ellie go?" She did not raise her voice. "This is absolutely my fight." Something shifted in his face. Not his expression exactly, something deeper than expression, in the architecture of how he held himself. "All right," he said. She sat down at the table across from him, and they talked it through. What the letter said, what the law likely allowed, what a man named Deacon Pryor at the church had once done with a similar water dispute over in Caldwell County. They talked for the better part of an hour, and when Ellie came in from the yard with mud on her boots and a wild optimism about whether she'd seen a fox or just an unusual dog, Jack looked up from the papers with something close to steadiness in his face, and Abigail thought that the worst of it anyway was not going to be faced alone. The hearing at Millhaven lasted 4 hours. Abigail had gone. Jack had not asked her to, and she had come anyway, which he did not object to after one long look that said he was glad of it. Deacon Pryor came with them, having spent 2 evenings at the kitchen table, with the copied deed and a Bible, and a patience for precedent that turned out to be exactly what was needed. Jack presented the Pryor claim. The deacon read the relevant passage from the water statute in a voice trained to carry over a congregation. Holt Greer's lawyer had expected no contest and had prepared accordingly. The county clerk ruled for Jack before sunset. They drove home in the cold, in the dark, Ellie asleep across Abigail's lap with her mouth open and the one-eared horse tucked under her arm. Jack drove without talking for the first several miles. The stars were out by the time they crossed the Harlan Flats road. "Thank you," he said. "Just that." "You did it," she said. "I wouldn't have known how to start," he said. "Before you came, I mean. I would have just—" He stopped. "I don't do well alone," he said. It cost him something to say it. She could hear that plainly. Abigail looked at the dark pines. "Most people don't," she said. He was quiet again for a while. Ellie turned in her sleep and put one small hand on Abigail's arm, fingers curled, trusting the way children trust when they have decided you are safe. Then Jack said, "The contract." She waited. "It doesn't say enough," he said. "What you've been, what you are, to this house, to her," a pause, "to me." "Jack," she said. "I'm not asking you to decide tonight," he said. "I'm asking you to consider." He turned his head, and for the second time he looked at her fully, without catching himself. "Whether you'd stay, not as the housekeeper, whether you'd stay as—" He let that land where it landed. Abigail looked at the sleeping child, and at the man beside her who had learned to do everything alone and was finally, carefully, asking not to. "I'm already here," she said. He reached across the sleeping child and covered her hand with his, briefly, the way people do when words are not enough and silence is too thin. Then he turned back to the road. They did not say anything else until the farm lights came into view. That was all right. There was time now. There was going to be time. In the days that followed, Ellie solved a problem she had identified weeks before. Abigail came in from the root cellar one afternoon to find the child on the stairs, struggling with an armful of things: a folded quilt, a small mirror that had been on the kitchen shelf, Abigail's second pair of good boots. "Ellie," she said, "what are you doing?" "Moving your things," Ellie said, with the simple clarity of someone engaged in obvious and necessary work. "Where?" "Upstairs." She said it as though this should require no further explanation. "The room across from mine. I swept it. There's a window that looks at the mountain." Abigail stood at the bottom of the stairs. She looked up at the child holding her boots and her mirror, wearing an expression of complete determination. Then she looked at the kitchen door, which stood open, and at Jack beyond it, who had come in quietly and was listening with his hat in his hand and something in his face that had been trying to be a certain thing for several weeks, and had now decided to stop trying and simply be it. "The contract gave you the room off the kitchen," he said. His voice was quiet and even. "But Ellie's already moved your things. She's been moving them since Tuesday." A pause, a long one. "I thought you ought to know I didn't stop her." Abigail looked at Ellie, who looked back at her with the one-eared horse in the crook of her elbow and a ribbon in her hair that she had tied herself, and which sat at an angle only a 5-year-old could consider satisfactory. She looked at Jack. "The room upstairs," she said. "Does it have a chair?" Jack held her gaze. "Not yet," he said. "Then you'd better make one." Something crossed his face then, quiet and deep and warm as banked coals. Not a smile exactly, though it was not far from one. He nodded, once. "It was a promise." Ellie said, "Does that mean you're staying?" Abigail climbed the first stair, then the second, and took the boots and the mirror gently from the child's arms. "Show me the window," she said, "that looks at the mountain." Ellie turned and led the way up, and Abigail followed, and below them Jack stood in the kitchen doorway with the January light coming in behind him, and the whole of the long winter ahead, and the spring after that, and whatever came after spring. He was not smiling outright, but the set of his shoulders had changed. The house had changed around him without his asking it to, and he was finding that he did not mind at all. There would be a chair in that room before the week was out. A good one, strong-jointed, made to last. He would start the wood tonight. There is something this story knows that is worth sitting with a while. A contract can only say so much. It can name the room and the wages and the work. It cannot name what happens when one person feeds another through the winter, when a child carries a pair of boots up a staircase because she has already decided, in the wordless wisdom of the very young, that this woman belongs to them. It cannot name the moment when a man who has learned to be alone looks up from his grief and finds the world still full of good things, if only he will stop turning away from them. Abigail came to Harlan Flats with a carpetbag and a letter and not much else. She left the room off the kitchen not because the contract changed, but because something more durable and more honest than any contract asked her to. Love does not always arrive with declarations and ceremony. Sometimes it arrives with a mended shelf and a cup of warmed milk, and a little girl moving your boots one by one up the stairs. If this story found you tonight, perhaps it is asking you to think, where in your own life is someone already moving the chair? Where has someone shown you, in small and steady acts, what they cannot yet put into words? Leave a comment and tell us about a time when an act of care meant more to you than anything that could have been said. We would love to hear from you. And if you would like more journeys into the Old West, into the stories of ordinary people who found extraordinary grace in hard country, please subscribe and stay with us. There are many more roads to ride. Good night. God bless you and all those you hold dear.